thing into chaos. There is a type of character called an anti-hero. What is this anti-hero? Whatever qualities a hero has, the anti-hero has the opposite of it. The hero is strong, brave, loved by people. The hero is weak, cowardly, not loved or even hated by people. Dostoevsky's protagonist in Notes from the Underground is actually a complete anti-hero. Even the first sentence of the book begins with the narrator's self-deprecation. I am a sick man, I am a bad man, I am a sullen man. But the main character in this book, the underground man, is very different from the main characters in Dostoevsky's other works. We can even say that this person is a character design outside of Dostoevsky's style. If we look at the main characters in Dostoevsky's other great works, for example, Raskolnikov, Ivan Karamazov, Nikolai Savragin, or Prince Myshkin, these characters are designed to be interesting both physically and in terms of their impact on the reader, even in the face of tragic scenarios, as in Notes from the Underground, as if Dostoevsky deliberately made these characters handsome, charismatic, and impressive. However, the underground man in this work is depicted in such a way that if we saw him on the street, we would change our way or look at him with disgust. From this point of view, when we look at Notes from the Underground, we see that Dostoevsky differs from his other works. Then let's ask our question, what is the problem of this underground man? In the first part of this book, the underground man speaks at length about topics such as man's enjoyment of suffering, his love of acting against his own self-interest, and his behavior that is far removed from reason. Then the purpose of this underground man is just to spill his guts and throw in our faces some truths that every human being internally accepts as true. In fact, there is an opinion that this person tried to refute. Let's examine the historical background of the book to better understand it. At the time this book was written, ideologies such as national permission and socialism were beginning to sprout in Russia, and some writers were engaged in social engineering accompanied by these ideologies, and one of these writers was Nikolai Chernyshevsky. In his work How to Do It, this author describes a new social order, a socialist utopia, in which everything will work in the interests of man and reason will be prioritized. Chernyshevsky describes the experiences of people living in this order with the term eternal joy, and this work of Chernyshevsky made a lot of noise in Russia at that time. Dostoevsky in his book Notes from the Underground argues that the philosophical system in Nikolai Chernyshevsky's work will not work in a strange creature like man, and criticizes and even mocks this system through the character called the underground man. But to understand all this philosophy, let's start from the most basic and dwell on the concept of sacrifice. We can define altruism as a person's thinking about someone else's interest rather than thinking about one's own interest, even sacrificing one's own interest for the sake of it. So can we talk about a real sense of altruism in people? I mean a person who sincerely strives for the benefit of the other person, not for his own benefit. Here the philosophy of egoism says that a person's motivation is actually his own interests, and the actions we do under the guise of altruism. Although we claim that we are doing it for the interests of others, we are actually doing it for our own benefit. For example, let's consider a mother. A mother is generally the most commonly used pattern in exemplifying the concept of sacrifice. This mother does not eat herself. She feeds her child, she works hard to educate her child and wants to see him come to good places. Egoism is the struggle for the benefit of the child in these actions of the mother. For some reason, her own interest in the target. After all, as a result of these actions of the mother, her child will come to good places and the mother will also have a share in this success. In addition to this spiritual pleasure, in the future, when the child grows up and the mother grows old, this time it will be the mother who will request help. So we can also say that these actions are an investment for the future for the mother. Although the hero seems to sacrifice himself for the sake of the people he wants to save, as a result of this, he will also have personal interests such as being loved and glorified by his people even after his death. A hero will become a legend for a historical period of time. The philosophy of egoism. Chernyshevsky in his book How to Do It acknowledges that the philosophy of egoism is in accordance with human nature and talks about rational egoism, which is a sub-branch of this philosophy, and this is exactly the philosophical view of how he criticizes the underground man. Rational egoism not only accepts that a person's motivation is self-interest, but also thinks that this situation is rational. First of all, let me point out that things change a little when we put the word rational, that is, Rational, in front of egoism. Because rational egoism is irrational because it is not rational to act against our own self-interest. In his book, Chernyshevsky designs a social order based on rational egoism, in which each person strives for his own interests. And what those interests are is chosen according to reason and science, and since man is an intelligent creature, it is assumed that he will not betray his own reason and nature to live in accordance with his interests. Now that we have established the philosophical background necessary for this book, let's move on to how the underground man criticizes rational egoism. It is impossible to argue with rationalists because they say that reason is on their side, and the underground man acts in the opposite way because he knows this. While rational egoism accepts human beings as intelligent, the underground man draws attention to the irrational in human beings. And he says that although today's man is in many respects superior to the man of the age of barbarism, he has not been able to get used to following the path indicated by reason and knowledge. What the underground man really criticizes is not that rational egoism is irrational or malicious, but that it is not applicable to a creature like man who likes to act irrationally. For example, let's look at what self-interest is. Rational egoism argues that human interests are in a certain format, like a mathematical formula. For example, everyone desires joy or pleasure or prosperity. The underground man's argument is that human beings do not always act in their own self-interest. Sometimes we enjoy suffering, we crave suffering, even if it is against our self-interest. We do it because it is what we feel like doing. And the fact that a person can act according to what he feels like is something that rational egoism does not take into account, but which the underground man emphasizes. He underlines this situation as follows: no matter who he is, man always likes to act according to the will of the soul, not as the wise interest dictates everywhere. Another point that the underground step draws attention to the flaws in human nature is the absurd attitude that a person adopts when he is about to reach his goal. Whether the fact that man loves to destroy everything and turn it into chaos is due to the instinctive fear of finishing the structure he is working on and reaching his goal, or I would like to dwell on this part a little bit in interpreting this sentence first. Let's examine how what we aim for has effects on human life. If a person has a goal in life, it is necessary to accept that this goal adds meaning to human life. When a person gets up in the morning and goes to bed in the evening, he usually reminds himself of his goal and is motivated by this, even when he suffers. Thinking about his goal has a soothing effect against this pain. We can show athletes as an example of this situation. Even combat sports, which are pain-oriented, are a more suitable example for this situation. A fighter takes serious blows to his body during a match, but at the time of the match he does not seem to be pulling the crown because he is running after a target during the match. He is so caught up in damaging his opponent and avoiding future damage that he cannot focus on the pain in his body until the match is over. When the match is over, the pain is felt much more effectively because the target loses its focus. If we pay attention to the interviews they give, we can see that they do not feel any pain during the match, but as soon as the match is over, they are exposed to intense pain. It is obvious that having a goal and a purpose has a soothing effect against pain, and the thoughts that I am not suffering in vain, I am suffering for a purpose, and the suffering is a price I have to pay on this path I am walking, increase the level of pain tolerance significantly. We have called the ability to struggle with the pain and motivation that having a goal brings to a person, in general meaning, and when we reach the goal, not only the goal but also the meaning that this goal brings to our lives will be lost. And we know that creating a new goal or meaning is also a very painful process, and the instinctive feeling of achieving one's goal, which the underground man observed in human beings. Another criticism that the underground man brings to utopian dreams based on rational egoism is that this system sees man as a machine rather than a human being. And in the next section, let's talk about how Chernyshevsky uses causality in his Utopia and the underground man's views on causality. Indeed, what if one day the formula for all our desires and whims is found more precisely? If a precise mathematical formula for the laws by which they arise and the paths they follow in various situations is revealed, then a person will probably or even definitely start not wanting anything. What is the taste of desiring by looking at the ruler? To better understand the part of desiring by looking at the ruler here, The concept of causality, let's focus on causality, tells us that every result has a cause and every result can be explained by attributing it to a cause, since every result has a cause. If we bring out the same cause again under the same conditions, it will give the same result. For example, if a fire has lit a torch under a certain condition, a fire will always light a torch as long as that condition is met. The social order in the dreams of writers like Chernyshevsky tries to apply causality on people. Let's say there is a person, and this person is sad, and we have a result that we call a sad person. Then there must be a reason for this situation, that is, sadness, such as the person breaking up with his lover, failing in his goal, or losing a relative. Let's call all these negative experiences in general, and according to causality, it turns out that as long as these negative experiences exist in the person will be sad. Now let's consider the opposite of this situation. That is, if we have a cheerful person, the reason we can deduce from this result is that the person had a positive experience before becoming cheerful and was cheerful as a result of this experience. And for rational egoism, these positive experiences are the interests of the person. And when we add causality to this equation, the person whose interests are provided is always cheerful. If through causality we can deduce how a person will be cheerful, then let us build such a social order so that the concepts that will make a person cheerful, i.e. interests, will always exist, and the person will always remain cheerful as a result of these causes, and the state of eternal joy mentioned in Chernyshevsky's book will be realized. However, even in a single sentence, the underground man says that causality cannot be applied to man. Man is not a piano key, a man is not a piano key or a piece of bolt. We cannot expect a causal relationship. A person may be sad, but maybe he has not had any negative experiences. Everything is going well in his life, but he is still sad. We do not know that a person whose all personal interests are provided will necessarily be cheerful. Even if all his interests are provided, he may not want to be cheerful at that moment. After all, we are not talking about a strict causality like a fire touching a torch. We are not talking about a strict causality like a fire touching a torch. There is an extremely complex creature we call a human being, anyway. I think the whole job of people is to prove to themselves every moment that they are not a bolt but a human being. In fact, the underground man does not describe the state of acting according to the will of the soul in humans as a good thing. For example, for a person who has all his interests secured and nothing goes wrong in his life, to be stubbornly sad is ungrateful and arrogant for the underground man. But the point he comes back to is that the stubbornness to act according to the will of his soul, which may seem illogical and absurd, has always existed and will always exist in the human soul. It should also be said that it is necessary to say that the utopia is also similar to a prison, where people have a full belief in the causality of predetermined outcomes. To systems tell a person what to do and prevent them from acting according to their will. And speaking of prison, Dostoevsky has a book in which he describes his 4 years of imprisonment in Siberia. Memoirs from the House of the Dead. And I want to talk about a relevant chapter in this book. Dostoevsky analyzes this situation in The Prisoner with the following words: a conscious longing for himself, the desire to assert himself, and the desire to behave as he wants to behave with the discourse of the underground man. A prison tells people when to eat, when to pacing, and when to go to bed. In short, a person cannot behave as he wants in prison. He has to obey the ruler of rules that the prison offers him. It can be said that the utopic order criticized by the underground man is a kind of ruler of rules. This order tells us that the system we have established has determined your interests instead of you, so you don't need to think about your own interests. Live as we impose on you. Don't go outside our ruler enough. We can accept that it is true that concepts such as prosperity, pleasure, or joy that this system offers us as interests are desired by the generality of people. But the fact that this system eliminates human freedom changes the balance considerably, because according to the underground man, people do not want to sacrifice their freedom even for the sake of their interests. They always want to keep the option to act as they want in their pocket, and it is an utopia that provides our interests. Even if it is established, a subterranean man will emerge from among these rational people and will try to act according to the will of the flesh and not according to his interests. The subterranean man effectively conveys that the utopia offered to us by rational egoism, or the behavioral ruler offered to us by causality, will not work for a creature like man who is not as rational. as he thinks and who chooses to act according to the will of his flesh rather than looking at the ruler. So what is his solution to this situation? In philosophy, when a view is criticized, a counter-view is usually put forward and explain that view. For example, while altruism advocates altruism rather than self-interest, those who do not accept this view put forward egoism and claim that a person is actually working for his own interests. Underground man rational egoism and causality. He brings very successful criticisms against his views, but is there another view that he brings in terms of a solution to these criticisms? Things do not go as expected in this part of the book. This person, who makes an effective philosophy in the first part of the book, still cannot come up with an opinion to defend against the views he criticizes, especially when we try to draw an opinion from his way of life. Things get worse. In the second part of the book, when the underground man mixes with people, we better understand what kind of a man he is. This person is a completely negative character who lowers the energy of every environment he enters and makes things go wrong. And the advice he gives about life is that it is immoral to live after the age of 40, it is best to be lazy, etc. Absurdly, he is so stubborn in order to refute rational egoism that he goes to the doctor even though he is sick. There are times when he acts against his interests not because he feels like it, but because of his stubbornness to refute a certain view. Moreover, by doing so, he does not really act as he feels like it, but falls into a contradiction. As a result, the underground man leaves us with his strange philosophy, which we can hardly justify and leaves a lot of question marks in the mind. In this part, let's move away from the underground man and try to look at the problem at hand from different angles. We have an argument that a person does not sacrifice his right to act as he wants, even if it is against his interests. Then let's ask the following question: is it as good as it is thought to be that a person can act as he wants, that is, to be free? For example, the moment Kierkegaard realizes that a person is free, anxiety accompanies freedom. And Kierkegaard considers people in this situation to be in a state of freedom stupor. A good example of this concept is the anxiety felt by a person looking down from a high building. In fact, this is where the problem lies. If this person wants to jump, there is no force to prevent him. He is completely free to jump out of here. Everything depends on him, and this realization puts the person in a state we call freedom stupor. Even though the underground man initially believed that man would not sacrifice his freedom for the sake of his interests and that he would not sacrifice his freedom for the sake of his interests, in the last pages of his book, he shifts to a Kierkegaard-like way of thinking about freedom, giving us more freedom, and tying our hands, expanding our range of motion, removing the guardianship over us, and I assure you that at that moment we will long to be under guardianship again. Towards the end of the book, the underground man draws attention to the fact that man is a tragic and in-between creature. At the expense of acting as he wants, he even contradicts his own interests, but when he attains the freedom he desires so much, this time he cannot struggle with the anxieties brought by freedom. The book Notes from the Underground points out this paradox in the human soul very well, but it cannot answer how to struggle with this paradox. In this part, it may be useful to go out of the character in the book and examine the author of the book, that is, to focus on Dostoevsky's thoughts. If we look at the other works written by Dostoevsky after Notes from Underground, we see that he again addresses the problem of freedom. In his last book, The Brothers Karamazov, there is a statement that nothing is more compelling for a person than the freedom of conscience, but nothing is as painful as it either. This book contains a famous section known as the Grand Inquisitor, which is so rich in subtext that a separate video could be made just about this part. However, let's examine this section in the context of our topic, freedom. In this part, a conversation between Jesus and the Inquisitor is narrated, where the Inquisitor approaches Jesus. One of the issues he criticizes is Jesus giving people their freedom. According to the Inquisitor, granting freedom to a person is to impose a burden on them that they cannot bear. Freedom exceeds a person's capacity and only brings them suffering and regret. However, if we look at the idea of a person granting freedom to others through the lens of Dostoevsky's adopted Orthodox Christianity, we arrive at the conclusion that true piety cannot be considered independently of freedom. A human being is a creature that cannot be thought of separately from human freedom, and piety will only gain meaning when it is done through free will, not through coercion or oppression. While the underground man cannot establish human freedom, Dostoevsky brings a religious perspective to freedom in his last book. In a collection of Dostoevsky's personal notes, there is a section regarding free will that states, "Today, the way the world conceives free will is akin to a license. However, true freedom is only achieved by overcoming the self and the will, thus reaching a moral condition where a person is the true master of themselves at every moment. The form of freedom is to embark on a journey to share everything you have and serve everyone. If a person is capable of this, if they can open themselves to this extent, then are they not free? This is the highest manifestation of that will."